So imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? And you check the news and you find out that um, a staggering $2.4 trillion has just completely vanished.
Just gone.
Right, gone from the global economy. And I mean, not over a decade, not over a century, every single year.
Yeah, annually.
$2.4 trillion wiped out every year. And, it's not because of a stock market crash or a burst housing bubble or some sudden currency collapse.
No, it's something much more fundamental.
Exactly. It's because the actual physical world that supports our entire global economy is just, well, it's buckling. You've got factories flooded completely out of existence, coastal supply lines just swallowed by the sea.
Agricultural yields absolutely decimated by heat waves.
Yeah, and entire regions, like huge swaths of the map, rendered completely uninsurable.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. And the crazy part is that $2.4 trillion figure, it isn't science fiction. It's a cold, hard projection for the year 2030.
Which is practically tomorrow in business terms.
Right. And it's calculated by the people whose entire business model depends on, accurately pricing risk. And sitting right next to that massive financial crater is this even more staggering human reality.
The population numbers.
Yes. 3.6 billion people. That is nearly half the population of this planet. And they are currently living in environments that are highly vulnerable to these incoming shocks.
I mean, when you really sit with those numbers, it completely reorients how we have to think about risk.
How so?
Well, when you look at numbers of that magnitude, trillions of dollars, billions of lives, it makes the traditional concerns of, say, project management feel a bit trivial.
Like what kind of concerns?
Like shaving a few percentage points off a quarterly budget or optimizing a software sprint. It feels kind of like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship.
Wow, yeah, I could see that.
Because a foundational assumption of modern business has always been environmental stability. You pour a concrete foundation, you build a supply chain, you launch a product.
And you just assume the weather's going to cooperate.
Yeah, exactly. You assume the climate will behave the way it did for the last 100 years. And that assumption, right now, is the single biggest liability on any balance sheet.
Which brings us perfectly to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a single, incredibly concentrated document that just completely shatters that old assumption.
It really takes a sledgehammer to it.
It does. So what we have is a detailed infographic chapter from Dr. Rachid Ouache's work on net positive project management. And specifically, we're looking at a section titled Climate Change, the Defining Challenge of Our Time.
It's a fantastic piece of work.
It is, and I want to set the stage for you, the listener, right away. Whether you are, say, a complete beginner to climate science who just wants to finally understand the mechanics behind the headline.
Or if you're a seasoned project manager trying to figure out why, your material costs are suddenly spiking.
Right, or why your insurance premiums are doubling. This deep dive is custom tailored for you. We're going to translate all this high-level planetary science into daily operational reality.
And that translation is exactly what makes Dr. Ouache's document so vital, honestly.
Yeah, it really bridges the gap.
Because it strips away the abstract, distant nature of these climate discussions. It forces us to look at this through a highly specific operational lens.
Definitely. And the document uses this phrase that I think we need to anchor this entire discussion around. It says climate change is a, quote, systemic risk multiplier and a strategic business imperative.
Now, those are heavy terms.
They are. Let's break those down because, systemic risk multiplier sounds like a phrase a consultant uses just to charge you more money.
It does sound like corporate jargon.
Right. But when you actually think about the mechanics of it, it's pretty terrifying. It means climate change isn't just like one new problem to add to your list of problems.
No, it interacts with everything.
Exactly. It takes every single risk you are already sweating over labor shortages, geopolitical tension, raw material costs, supply chain bottlenecks, and it just pours gasoline on them.
That's a great way to put it. If you have a fragile supply chain, a climate event will find that fragility and break it.
Yeah. And then the second part of that phrase, the strategic business imperative, that tells me this is no longer some philanthropic side project.
Although absolutely not.
This isn't about setting up a recycling bin in the break room to make the PR department happy.
No, it is the ultimate filter for future market survival. If your projects, your infrastructure, and your business models do not integrate climate action today, they will become completely obsolete.
Or literally uninsurable.
Right. Building resilience isn't just about, hugging trees and protecting the planet. It is inextricably linked to securing long-term competitive advantage.
So if integrating this action is our strategic imperative, we have to start by measuring the monster in the room. We need to diagnose the disease before we can talk about the cure.
We need the baseline.
Exactly. So when you look at the baseline data presented in this document, we are currently sitting at a global temperature rise of about 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
Right. And that data comes from the IPCC, right?
Yes, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from their 2023 report. And for anyone unfamiliar, the IPCC is essentially the gold standard of global climate consensus.
It's basically thousands of scientists from around the world.
Right, synthesizing every single piece of peer-reviewed data available. So they tell us we are at 1.1 degrees. But honestly, what really keeps me up at night is the trajectory we're on.
The trajectory is where the real nightmare is.
Yeah, because the document cites the UN Environment Program, the UNEP, and they state that our current global policies have us on track for roughly 3.3 degrees Celsius of warming by the year 2100.
Which is a massive jump. The gap between where we are right now at 1.1 degrees and where we are hurtling toward at 3.3 represents just a catastrophic failure of current systems.
It really does.
And it's important to clarify those organizations, because their data isn't just speculative guessing.
Yeah.
The UNEP tracks the actual policies and the emissions pledges that governments and industries have put into writing.
So it's based on what we're actually promising to do.
Exactly. They take those promises and they model the physical outcome. And their math shows that our current promises don't prevent the crisis. They pretty much guarantee it.
Okay, I have to pause here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because this is where I think a lot of people experience profound data fatigue. We constantly hear these highly specific numbers, 1.1 degrees, 1.5, 3.3, thrown around on the evening news all the time.
People tune it out.
They do. And to a beginner, or honestly just a regular professional trying to get through a Tuesday, the difference between a 1.1 degree world and a 3.3 degree world sounds completely trivial.
Right, it sounds like nothing.
Because we experience local weather that fluctuates by like 20 degrees between breakfast and dinner. So when someone says the globe is warming by 3 degrees, it sounds like the difference between wearing a light jacket or just throwing on a long sleeve shirt.
That's the classic misconception.
Right. Why is a 3.3 degree trajectory so catastrophic from a practical physical perspective? Help me understand that.
Well, the jacket analogy perfectly illustrates why human psychology struggles so much with climate data. We are wired to understand local, daily weather, not global, long-term climate.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Weather is what happens outside your window today. Climate is the total energy balance of the entire planetary system, the oceans, the atmosphere, the ice caps. A much more accurate analogy is the human body.
Oh, I like this. Walk me through the human body analogy.
So your normal internal body temperature is roughly 37 degrees Celsius.
Right.
If your core temperature goes up by just 1.1 degrees, you have a fever.
You feel terrible.
Exactly. You feel fatigued, your joints ache, your immune system is strained, you can't perform your daily tasks normally.
Okay, I'm with you.
That is exactly where the Earth is right now at 1.1 degrees of warming. The systems are strained. We are seeing more extreme storms, longer droughts, stressed ecosystems. The planet basically has a fever.
And so the 3.3 degree projection, what does that look like?
If your core body temperature goes up by 3.3 degrees, you are pushing past 40 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You aren't just feeling sluggish at that point, you are in the emergency room.
That's a huge difference.
Your organs are experiencing thermal stress. At that level, your biological systems begin to cascade into failure.
So it's not just feeling warm, it's system failure.
Exactly. The Earth's climate system operates with a similarly delicate thermal balance. Ocean currents, jet streams, the monsoon cycles that literally feed billions of people, they are all regulated by tiny temperature differentials.
So changing the baseline changes everything.
Right. At 3.3 degrees of global warming, you aren't just getting hotter summers, you are fundamentally rewiring the physical environment that supports human civilization.
Which brings us directly back to that jaw-dropping financial figure we started with. The document explicitly spells out what that planetary organ failure looks like in dollars and cents.
The 2.4 trillion?
Yeah. It's the Swiss Re Institute, projecting $2.4 trillion in annual global economic losses by 2030.
By 2030, it's so close.
It is. And for anyone who isn't in the finance or risk sector, we should clarify what Swiss Re is. They are one of the world's largest reinsurance companies.
They insure the insurance companies.
Exactly. They are the ultimate backstop of global capitalism. They do not deal in hyperbole or, environmental activism.
Yeah.
Their entire existence is predicated on calculating cold, mathematically sound risk.
They live and die by the math.
Right. So when they say we're going to lose $2.4 trillion a year, how does that actually manifest for the listener, like the person who is managing a portfolio of projects right now?
Well, it manifests as total operational friction. Let's say you're managing a global manufacturing project. You need microchips from Southeast Asia, raw aluminum from South America, and final assembly in Europe.
Okay, a standard global supply chain.
Right. Under the old model, you just worry about logistics and labor costs. But in a world approaching $2.4 trillion in climate losses, things change.
How so?
Well, maybe a critical factory in Southeast Asia gets taken offline for 3 months because a historically unprecedented flood overwhelms their local infrastructure.
Which we're seeing happen more and more.
Exactly. So suddenly your project in Europe just stalls. The port you rely on in South America is battered by a cyclone that the local grid wasn't designed to withstand.
So the power goes out.
Power goes out, cranes stop working, and your aluminum sits on a dock for 6 weeks.
And the cost of capital skyrockets while you're waiting.
Precisely. This is the uninsurable aspect of the crisis, because if an area becomes too prone to extreme weather, banks will simply refuse to finance development there.
And insurers will refuse to cover the assets.
Right. I mean, we are already seeing major insurance companies pulling out of states like California and Florida because the wildfire and hurricane risks have just made the math impossible.
That's a terrifying reality.
Yeah.
Entire geographic regions could just become economic dead zones.
Yeah. And if you are building a project in one of those zones or relying on a supplier in one of those zones, your risk profile just went through the roof.
Wow. Okay, so we have this massive, terrifying gap. We are at a 1.1 degree fever. We are heading for a 3.3 degree systemic failure. And we are staring down the barrel of $2.4 trillion in annual losses by 2030.
Which, again, is practically tomorrow in project planning terms.
It really is. So to understand how we are hurtling toward that 3.3 degree mark, we really need to investigate how we got to the 1 degree baseline.
We have to look at the history.
Right. Why are emissions still climbing despite decades of warnings? Because the document gives us a very clear historical roadmap of this trajectory, starting with the primary drivers.
Yeah, the infographic breaks the root causes down into 6 very distinct categories.
Let's run through those.
Okay, it lists dependence on fossil fuels, high-emitting industrial processes, deforestation and land use change, unsustainable consumption patterns, rapid urbanization and infrastructure demand, and finally, agricultural emissions and land degradation.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of these drivers, because it's so easy to just wave a hand and say pollution, right?
Yeah.
But let's look at the actual data graph the document provides for global CO2 emissions.
A gigaton graph.
Yeah, it measures emissions in gigatons of CO2 per year, and it starts in 1990. In 1990, global emissions were at 21.3 gigatons.
Okay.
By the year 2000, we hit 24.5 gigatons. By 2010, there's this massive jump to 31 gigatons. In 2020, we were at 34.8, and as of 2023, we hit a record 37 gigatons.
That timeline is absolutely critical to understand because 1990 wasn't chosen at random.
It wasn't.
No, the year 1990 is the baseline for almost every major international climate treaty, including the Kyoto Protocol. That was the era when the scientific consensus regarding greenhouse gases became completely undeniable on the global political stage. The world leaders gathered, they looked at the 21.3 gigatons and they said, we have to bring this number down. And yet, if you look at that graph from 1990 to 2023, it is a relentless, almost perfectly straight line upward.
Okay, here is how I process that graph. It is like watching someone who just got a terrifying wake-up call from their doctor about their cholesterol, right?
Yeah.
And they also realize they have a massive, life-threatening amount of credit card debt.
Okay, a double whammy.
Exactly. So they sit down at the kitchen table, they make a strict budget, they talk endlessly about cutting back and eating healthy.
They make all the pledger.
They make the pledges. But the very next day, they decide to upgrade to a massive new mansion, they buy a luxury sports car on a high-interest loan, and they start eating steak dinners every single night.
That is, unfortunately, very accurate.
Right. On a global scale, we have been holding summits and talking about making cuts for 30 years, but our actual spending of carbon has nearly doubled, from roughly 21 gigatons to 37 gigatons.
We just kept swiping the card.
We are vastly accelerating our spending while openly acknowledging that we are ecologically bankrupt.
The credit card analogy is incredibly apt, and if you look closely at that jump you mentioned, the massive spike between 2000 and 2010, where we went from 24.5 to 31 gigatons, you see the exact mechanisms of that spending spree.
What was happening then?
Well, that decade saw an explosion of rapid globalization and industrialization, particularly with nations like China entering the WTO and becoming the manufacturing hub of the entire world.
Right. That was the era of building massive global supply chains and the infrastructure to support the internet boom.
Exactly. And how did we build all that infrastructure if we look back at those 6 primary drivers from the document?
We used high-emitting industrial processes to forge the steel and mix the concrete.
Yes. And we relied entirely on our dependence on fossil fuels to power those factories and ship those goods across the ocean.
We fueled rapid urbanization by moving hundreds of millions of people into new megacities.
Which required clearing forests, our land use change driver, to create new agricultural zones to feed them. The gold standard of project management during this era was just speed, scale, and immediate cost efficiency.
Just build it fast and build it cheap.
Exactly. The carbon cost, the actual emissions pumped into the atmosphere, the destruction of local wetlands was completely left off the balance sheet.
It was treated as an externality.
Completely.
The environment was just viewed as this infinite, free dumping ground that would never, ever send us a bill.
And that fundamentally flawed accounting system is exactly what drove that relentless upward climb in emissions. We built the modern, interconnected world using a framework that completely ignored the physical limits of the planet.
We achieved incredible short-term prosperity by taking out a massive loan against the climate.
We did.
Which brings us to the very harsh reality that the debt collector is officially at the door.
They're knocking loudly.
They are, because those 37 gigatons of CO2 we are pumping out every single year. They aren't just disappearing into the ether. They are accumulating, they are trapping heat, and they are translating into direct, highly destructive physical and social impacts right now.
It's happening today.
And the document outlines this cascade of impacts. It breaks them down into 5 major categories that, honestly, every project manager needs to memorize.
This is the section where the concept of this systemic risk multiplier transitions from being a theoretical economic model into terrifying daily reality.
Right. What are the 5 categories?
The 5 impact categories are rising temperatures, extreme weather, sea level rise, ecosystem disruption, and socioeconomic risks.
Let's spend some real time exploring the mechanics here. Because understanding how these impacts happen is crucial for figuring out how to actually adapt to them. Let's start with rising temperatures. The document lists heat waves, wildfires, and extreme heat-threatening lives and productivity. It sounds straightforward, but the operational impact is massive.
It really is.
I was reading a case study recently about construction projects in the Middle East and parts of the American Southwest. When the ambient temperature hits 45 degrees Celsius, or about 113 Fahrenheit, human beings simply cannot perform manual labor outside safely.
They just physically can't. The physiological limits of the human body become a hard boundary for your project schedule.
So what happens to the project?
Well, if your workers can only safely operate for 4 hours a day in the early morning, your labor costs just doubled, and your project timeline just stretched by months.
And that doesn't even factor in the stress on the materials.
No, not at all. Concrete cures differently in extreme heat. Heavy machinery overheats and requires way more maintenance.
Okay, then we move to the second category. Extreme weather. The text points to floods, droughts, and cyclones causing devastation. The science behind this is fascinating and terrifying. It's all about the Clausius-Clapeyron relation.
You've been doing your homework. Yes, the Clausius-Clapeyron relation.
Tell us about it.
It's a principle in thermodynamics. It basically states that for every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, the atmosphere can hold about 7% more moisture.
So the atmosphere literally becomes a bigger sponge.
Precisely. A warmer atmosphere sucks more moisture out of the soil, which accelerates droughts in dry regions.
But what goes up must come down, right?
Exactly. When that supersaturated atmosphere finally releases that moisture, it doesn't fall as a gentle, sustaining rain. It falls as a catastrophic deluge.
The superstorm.
Right. And our municipal drainage systems, our bridges, our dams, they were engineered using historical rainfall data that is now completely obsolete.
Which perfectly transitions to the third category, sea level rise. We are talking about coastal flooding, erosion, and saltwater intrusion threatening infrastructure.
Yes.
And again, the mechanism here isn't just melting glaciers, though that is obviously a huge part of it. It's also thermal expansion.
Right. The water itself gets bigger.
Exactly. As the oceans absorb the trapped heat, the physical water molecules actually expand and take up more space. But the term saltwater intrusion is the one that really caught my eye here from an engineering perspective.
Saltwater intrusion is a silent infrastructure killer.
How does it work?
Well, when sea levels rise, the saltwater doesn't just wash over the beach, it pushes inland beneath the surface, infiltrating freshwater aquifers.
Okay.
So if you are a project manager building a coastal facility, that salt water seeps into the porous concrete foundations. The salt corrodes the internal steel rebar.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the rebar rusts, expands, and literally blows the concrete apart from the inside. A building designed to last a century might become structurally unsound in 30 years.
Wow. Then we have the fourth category, ecosystem disruption, which encompasses biodiversity loss, habitat degradation, and species extinction.
Right.
I think this is the one that business leaders historically dismissed as purely an environmentalist concern. Like, it's sad about the frogs, but we have a railway to build.
And that mindset represents a profound misunderstanding of how the natural world actually subsidizes the human economy.
How so?
Ecosystems provide services that we take completely for granted. Mangrove forests protect coastlines from storm surges better than any concrete seawall ever could.
And they're free.
Exactly. Thriving insect populations pollinate the crops that feed the global workforce. When you degrade habitats and cause keystone species to go extinct, you are destroying the natural infrastructure that keeps the world stable.
Which brings us to the fifth and arguably most complex category, socioeconomic risks.
This is the big one.
Yeah. The document defines this as insecurity in food, water, and energy, leading to inequality, migration, and instability. I really want to focus on this because it's so easy for a beginner to silo climate change into a box labeled extreme weather.
Right. We just think about storms.
We think, okay, we just need to build stronger roofs and deeper drains. But this document explicitly links environmental changes to human migration and geopolitical instability.
It does.
Let me throw a hypothetical scenario at you to test this. Let's say I am managing a massive international software deployment. My core development team is in one country, and I am sourcing specialized hardware components from a completely different continent.
Okay, pretty standard.
How does something like saltwater intrusion or localized ecosystem disruption halfway across the world actually impact my stakeholder management or my delivery schedule?
That is the exact question every modern project manager needs to be asking because the domino effect is incredibly fast. Let's map out your hypothetical scenario.
Please do.
Imagine rising temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns cause a severe multi-year drought in a highly productive agricultural region in a developing nation. That is your extreme weather impact.
Right, the first domino.
Because of that drought, local ecosystems collapse and there is widespread crop failure. That is your ecosystem disruption.
Okay, second domino.
Now, because the crops have failed, you have massive food insecurity and economic collapse in that region. When people cannot feed their families or make a living, they do what humans have done for millennia. They move.
They migrate.
Exactly. That triggers mass migration, which is your socioeconomic risk.
The dominoes are really picking up speed now.
Now imagine hundreds of thousands of displaced people migrating into a neighboring country or a major urban center. That massive influx strains the local infrastructure. Water rations are implemented, the electrical grid experiences rolling blackouts, and political tension boils over into civil unrest or localized conflict.
Wow. Okay, let's bring it back to my project.
Right. What if the port that ships your specialized hardware components is located in that destabilized neighboring country?
Then the port workers are striking, or the government shuts down exports to prioritize emergency supplies.
Exactly. Or what if your core software development team is based in the urban center dealing with the rolling blackouts? They can't keep their servers online.
So suddenly, my project schedule is delayed by 8 months, and my budget is blown to pieces.
And if you do a postmortem on that project failure using a traditional mindset, you might blame poor vendor management or unexpected political instability.
But the actual root cause, the first domino, was a climate-driven drought 3 countries away.
That's the systemic risk multiplier in action.
That is a phenomenal breakdown. It perfectly illustrates the text at the bottom of this section, where it states, climate change threatens every dimension of sustainable development, people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships.
It really is an intricately connected web.
You pull on one string-like shifting rainfall, and the entire global supply chain shakes. So with this grim reality fully mapped out, the 3.3-degree trajectory, the 37 gigatons of emissions, the absolute cascade of physical and socioeconomic collapse, what is the global blueprint to fix this?
We do have a blueprint.
We do. The document points us toward the major international agreement that everyone has heard of, but few fully understand, the Paris Agreement.
The Paris Agreement. Signed in 2015, it is the globally agreed upon framework designed specifically to prevent that 3.3-degree catastrophe.
And the document outlines its 3 primary goals, right?
Yes, yes. First, to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while actively pursuing efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees.
And that 1.5-degree mark, that is the ambitious safety zone we are desperately trying to cling to, right?
Correct. The scientific consensus shows that while 1.5 degrees of warming will still cause significant damage, it prevents the most irreversible existential tipping points from being crossed.
Okay, what's the second goal?
The second goal of the agreement is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the second half of this century.
Let's define net zero quickly for the beginners. That doesn't mean human beings stop emitting carbon entirely, right?
No, no. Achieving absolute zero emissions in a modern industrial society is practically impossible. We will still need to fly planes and forge steel.
So what does it mean?
Net zero means that any greenhouse gases we do emit into the atmosphere are perfectly balanced by the amount we actively remove from the atmosphere.
Like through planting massive new forests or using advanced carbon capture technology.
Exactly. The math balances out to zero. And the third goal of the Paris Agreement is to heavily invest in building global climate resilience.
But right after outlining these incredible, universally agreed upon goals, the document delivers a very sobering bottom line.
It does.
It states, achieving these goals requires immediate, deep, and sustained action across all sectors and projects. And then it places a massive warning label right next to that, reminding us that our current global emissions path, that 37 gigatons a year, is, quote, far above the pathway consistent with the Paris Agreement goals.
We're not even close.
So as someone who looks at how things actually get built in the real world, I have to ask, what are the main implementation barriers? If 196 parties universally agreed to this in Paris, why is there such a massive, terrifying gap between our stated goals and our actual physical actions?
That is the trillion-dollar question. And the barrier isn't a lack of scientific understanding, and it isn't a lack of high-level political goals.
Then what is it?
The primary implementation barrier is a profound failure of integration at the ground level. We are attempting to solve a 21st century existential planetary crisis using 20th century management and financial frameworks.
Explain that disconnect for me.
Think about what traditional project management is designed to do. It is a discipline optimized to mitigate immediate short-term risks to a specific budget and a specific schedule.
Okay.
The entire incentive structure for a project manager, a procurement officer, or a corporate executive is based on quarterly earnings reports and annual bonuses.
Right. So if I am building a commercial complex and my steel supplier raises their prices by 10%, my immediate job is to find a cheaper steel supplier in another country, regardless of how much carbon it takes to ship it across the ocean.
Exactly.
My boss doesn't care about the carbon footprint. They care about the profit margin for Q3.
Precisely. Long-term global climate resilience does not fit neatly into a quarterly financial report. The barrier is that the professionals actually executing the global economy, the engineers, the builders, the supply chain managers, have not been given the mandate, the specialized frameworks, or the financial budget to prioritize long-term carbon reduction over short-term financial savings.
We're trapped in the short term.
We have built an economic machine that is incredibly efficient at optimizing for tomorrow while completely ignoring the cliff we're driving off next decade. The risk of failure here isn't just a missed deadline or reduced dividend, it is existential.
And that is why the document includes such an emphatic statement in its key takeaways. The time for incremental change is over.
It's a very clear warning.
The time for incremental change is over. That is a powerful, uncompromising statement. It means tweaking the margins isn't going to save us. Incremental change is out. Immediate, deep structural action is in.
We need a new paradigm.
But what does that actually look like when you are sitting at a desk looking at blueprints, trying to build something in the real world?
Yeah.
How do we change the DNA of a project? This brings us to Section 5 of the document, which introduces Dr. Ouache's core solution, the net positive paradigm shift.
This is where the document transitions from being a terrifying diagnostic tool into an incredibly practical operational manual.
I love that.
It moves us from the high-altitude politics of international treaties down to the concrete, real-world execution on the ground. The central concept is net positive project management.
The text explicitly states that a net positive project must contribute to both mitigation and adaptation simultaneously. We need to break those two distinct terms down clearly for the listener.
Absolutely. The easiest way to conceptualize it is to imagine that climate change is a massive fire burning inside a building.
Okay, I'm with you.
Mitigation is all about addressing the root cause of the fire. It means turning off the gas line, putting away the matches, and starving the fire of oxygen.
Okay.
In project terms, mitigation is actively reducing your project's carbon footprint. It's using renewable energy, sourcing local materials to reduce shipping emissions, and designing energy-efficient buildings. It's ensuring your project isn't making the planetary fever worse.
And adaptation.
Adaptation is acknowledging that the fire is already burning, the building is already getting incredibly hot, and the smoke is rising. Adaptation means installing fireproof doors, heavy-duty sprinkler systems, and structural reinforcement so that you can survive the heat.
So preparing for the impacts.
Yes. In project terms, adaptation means designing your infrastructure to withstand the extreme weather, the floods, and the heat waves that are already locked into our climate system due to past emissions. It's building resilience into the physical and social structure of your project.
I love that breakdown. Let me throw a different analogy at you to capture the shift from the old mindset to the net positive mindset.
Let's hear it.
Past industry practices were like writing standard proprietary software code. You write the code to solve one specific problem for one specific client as quickly as possible. If the code is clunky and hogs system resources, it doesn't matter as long as it works for your client right now.
That is traditional project management, ignoring the externalities.
Right. Net positive project management is like writing elegant open source software. You aren't just solving the immediate problem for your client. You are writing code that is so efficient and so well structured that it actively improves the entire underlying operating system for everyone else who uses it.
That's a very modern way to frame it.
A net positive project doesn't just do less harm, it actively heals and strengthens the environment and the community it operates within.
That is an excellent analogy because it captures the idea of creating systemic value rather than just extracting it. And the document provides a phenomenal, large-scale, real-world case study to anchor this concept in reality.
The HS2 project.
Yes, the High-Speed 2 Railway project in the United Kingdom.
Let's dive deep into HS2 because infrastructure projects of that scale are historically absolute carbon nightmares.
Oh, massive emitter.
You are moving millions of tons of earth, pouring endless cubic meters of concrete, and displacing wildlife. How does a massive railway project become the poster child for net positive management?
By embedding the dual approach of mitigation and adaptation into the absolute core of the project's DNA from day one.
How do they do that?
Well, the document outlines specific measures they took. On the mitigation side, starving the fire, they didn't just use standard materials. They actively integrated low-carbon solutions, utilizing innovative, low-carbon concrete mixes that require significantly less energy to produce.
Okay, so that brings the footprint down.
Right. They also integrated renewable energy sources to power the construction phases and the future operation of the trains, drastically cutting their carbon debt.
But the part that really fascinated me was on the adaptation side, the fireproofing.
Yeah, this is brilliant.
The document highlights their use of biodiversity measures to future-proof the infrastructure. I think a lot of old-school project managers would roll their eyes at that. Like, why is a multi-billion-dollar transportation project worrying about planting trees and saving wetlands?
They think it's just PR.
Exactly. How does a wetland tie back to hardcore business value and risk management?
Because, as we discussed earlier, protecting ecosystems is the most efficient form of infrastructure risk management available.
Really?
Think about the extreme weather impacts we outlined. The UK is facing significantly increased rainfall and flooding risks. If you just lay standard tracks on bare Earth, the first major climate-driven superstorm will wash the soil away, cause landslides, and destroy the tracks.
Which means the railway shuts down, revenue stops, and repair costs skyrocket.
Exactly. But by integrating advanced biodiversity measures, by actively restoring local wetlands along the route, planting deep-rooted native vegetation, and creating green corridors, HS2 is utilizing nature's engineering.
Nature's engineering.
Yes, those wetlands act as massive natural sponges that absorb floodwaters before they can reach the tracks. The deep root systems of the native plants lock the soil in place, preventing landslides. They are using nature to adapt to the changing climate, ensuring the railway remains completely operational when a massive storm hits.
That is brilliant. The ecology is the infrastructure.
It is.
The ultimate lesson the document draws from the HS2 example is highlighted very clearly. Climate considerations must be embedded from the earliest stages of project planning.
Day one.
You cannot just build a traditional high-carbon railway and then slap a few solar panels on the station roof at the very end and issue a press release calling it sustainable. It has to be the foundational architecture of the project.
And this brings us to a massive prediction about future industry trends.
What's the prediction?
Building a railway with low-carbon concrete and advanced wetland restoration is undoubtedly more complex and requires more upfront investment during the planning phase. But the executive insight section of the document insists that this approach is the key to long-term competitive advantage and value creation.
Why is the market shifting in this direction?
Well, why do you think?
I'll tell you why. Because the invisible hand of the market is finally doing the math on that $2.4 trillion in projected losses.
They finally looked at the bill.
Exactly. The investors, the major global banks, and the reinsurance companies like Swiss Re are waking up to the undeniable reality that cheap, carbon-heavy, unadapted infrastructure is a massive, toxic financial liability.
Precisely. We are rapidly entering an era where capital will simply not flow to projects that ignore climate risk. If you try to secure funding for a major coastal development today, and you haven't mathematically proven how your project will survive 3 feet of sea level rise and increased hurricane activity,
The banks will laugh you out of the room.
because they know the project will be underwater, both literally and financially, before the loan is paid off.
Exactly. Future-proofed, net-positive projects secure cheaper capital. They face significantly fewer regulatory hurdles as governments crack down on emissions, and most importantly, they completely avoid the devastating operational costs of climate-related disruptions.
It just makes good business sense.
If you build the open-source software that improves the operating system, everyone wants to invest in your company. If you build the unsinkable boat, people will pay a premium to sail on it, and insurers will gladly cover it.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, this all makes perfect sense at the macroeconomic level.
Yeah.
If I am the CEO of a multinational infrastructure firm building HS2, I get it. But I want to translate this down to the daily grind for our listeners.
The boots on the ground.
Right. What about the regular professional tuning in right now? Maybe they aren't building a national railway. Maybe they're an IT project manager rolling out a new server architecture, or a supply chain manager optimizing delivery routes for a mid-sized retailer or a local real estate developer.
Right. How does this apply to them?
How do they apply this massive planetary net positive mindset when they're just trying to get through a highly stressful Tuesday morning budget meeting?
Yeah.
This is where Section 6 of the document provides an absolute lifesaver: the framework crosswalk.
The framework crosswalk is frankly the most vital tool in Dr. Ouache's entire document.
It's basically a translation guide.
It is. It takes the incredibly high-level existential concepts of global climate action and maps them directly, point by point, onto the standard operational frameworks that business professionals use every single day. It bridges the gap between the Paris Agreement and the Tuesday morning meeting.
It is a bit of an alphabet soup, but it's a crucial one to master.
Yeah.
Let's walk through the elements it connects.
Sure.
First, it lists the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Specifically, it highlights Goal 7, which is affordable and clean energy,
Sure.
13, climate action, 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, 11, sustainable cities, 12, responsible consumption, and 15, life on land.
Right.
Then it lists the ISO standards, specifically 1490 for adaptation, 14064 for greenhouse gas accounting, and 14001 for environmental management systems.
Okay, keep going.
It points to ESG factors, focusing heavily on the E, the environmental impact. It mentions the TCFD and TNFD. And finally, it takes all of those global standards and connects them directly to standard PMI Project Management Institute process. Things like risk management, stakeholder engagement, planning, and monitoring.
The sheer brilliance of this crosswalk is that it gives the modern project manager a powerful, universally recognized vocabulary to justify climate action to their stakeholders and executives.
Let's actually role play this out, because this is where the rubber meets the road. I will be the stubborn, highly stressed corporate stakeholder. I only care about the immediate budget, and my bonus is tied to delivering this project under cost. You be the project manager who wants to implement a net positive solution.
Oh, I'm ready for this.
All right, so I'm looking at your project proposal for our new regional distribution center. You are asking for a 15% budget increase to use specialized low-carbon steel, and you want to spend an extra 2 months redesigning the roof to capture rainwater and support a heavy solar array.
Yes, that's correct.
We're already behind schedule. Why on earth would I approve a 15% premium and a delay just to make the environmentalists happy? Use standard steel, standard roofing, and get it built.
Well, I completely understand the pressure on the Q3 budget. However, this isn't about making environmentalists happy. This is about protecting our operational revenue for the next decade.
Sounds like a stretch.
If we use standard steel and conventional roofing, we are taking on unpriced risk. By investing that 15% upfront, we are directly aligning this facility with the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures.
I don't care about a task force. I care about the budget.
You care about our insurance premiums, right?
Yes.
Our insurance providers are utilizing TCFD frameworks to evaluate our corporate risk right now. If we build a facility that cannot withstand the projected increase in regional thermal stress and extreme rainfall, our premiums on this building will skyrocket by 40% over the next 5 years.
Okay.
Furthermore, by utilizing the low-carbon steel, we are fulfilling our corporate obligations under ISO 14064 for greenhouse gas accounting. If we don't hit those ESG metrics, our major institutional investors have already signaled they will increase our cost of capital on the next funding round.
That's a problem.
The 15% premium today prevents a massive financial bleed over the operational life cycle of the asset, and it guarantees our supply chain remains resilient when the grid inevitably fails during the next heat wave.
Okay, as the stubborn stakeholder, I hate that you just made perfect financial sense, but you win the argument.
And that is exactly how the crosswalk functions. It changes the narrative. It stops being a conversation about short-term altruism or going green and becomes a hardcore conversation about long-term value creation, regulatory compliance, and existential risk mitigation.
You use the frameworks to speak the language of the executive.
Exactly.
To distill all of this incredible complexity down for our listeners, I want to pull 3 quick, highly actionable tips from this document that you can take to your desk tomorrow morning.
Let's do it.
Number 1, embed early. Do not treat climate considerations as a final checklist item or a PR afterthought. Based on the massive success of the HS2 lesson, climate risk analysis and carbon reduction strategies must be day one planning requirements.
Absolutely.
If you are drawing up a project charter or writing a scope of work, climate resilience needs to be baked into the foundational objectives.
Yep. What's number 2?
Number 2, think dual purpose. Evaluate every single project decision through the lens of both mitigation and adaptation. Don't just ask one question. Ask yourself, how is this specific material choice reducing our overall carbon footprint? And simultaneously ask, how is this design preparing our project to withstand extreme weather, heat waves, or supply chain shocks over the next 20 years?
Mitigation and adaptation. You have to have both.
Right. And number 3, use the crosswalk. Map your daily PMI processes directly to those global ESG, ISO, or SDG goals. When you conduct your standard risk assessment, do not just look at financial or scheduled risks. Look at physical climate risks and transition risks.
Expand the definition.
Exactly. When you conduct stakeholder management, expand your definition of a stakeholder to include the local ecosystem and the community that will be impacted by your project's environmental footprint.
Those are incredibly powerful, practical steps for daily application. Implementing them will undoubtedly be challenging, though.
For sure.
Aligning traditional, heavily entrenched, budget-constrained project management practices with these massive global imperatives requires immense professional courage. You have to be willing to challenge the status quo and have those difficult conversations with stakeholders.
You have to be willing to role play like we just did in real life.
Exactly. But as the key takeaways of the document explicitly state, climate action is essential for risk management and value creation. It is no longer a peripheral option. It is the core competency of the future.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, transitioning from planetary science to project blueprints. We started by looking at the stark, uncompromising reality of the data. The 1.1 degree fever we are currently living in, the terrifying 3.3 degree trajectory of systemic failure we are on, and the astonishing 37 gigatons of carbon debt we are still accumulating every single year.
We examined how those historical emissions, driven by our relentless dependence on fossil fuels and an economic model that ignored externalities, are acting as a systemic risk multiplier.
Right.
They are triggering a complex cascade of extreme weather events, accelerating ecosystem collapse, and driving severe socioeconomic instability and human migration.
We looked closely at the massive implementation gap between the global promises made in the Paris Agreement and the reality of our current trajectory, acknowledging the hard truth that the time for incremental change is completely dead and buried.
Incremental change is over.
And finally, we found a highly practical path forward in the paradigm shift of net positive project management. Learning from projects like HS2, we see that we must simultaneously mitigate our impact and adapt to a fundamentally changing world, embedding these principles from the very first day of planning and using the framework crosswalk to secure stakeholder buy-in.
It represents a fundamental rewiring of how human beings perceive value, calculate risk, and design the built-in corporate environment.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with the exact reflection question posed at the end of Dr. Ouache's document. I want you to take this question, write it down on a sticky note, and bring it to your next team meeting.
It's a great question.
The question is, how can your projects not only reduce their contribution to climate change, but also actively strengthen resilience and create climate-positive value?
And I would add a direct challenge to that reflection. Look around your workplace tomorrow. Look at the software you are developing, the supply chain you are optimizing, or the building you are designing, and ask yourself a very hard, honest question.
What's the question?
Are your current projects contributing to the 37 gigaton problem, or are they actively building the Paris Agreement solution? Because the data makes it incredibly clear that there is no longer a neutral ground.
That is a chilling but absolutely necessary thought to carry forward. And just to tease where we go from here, the document notes in its Looking Ahead section that climate change, as massive as it is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
It's just the beginning.
It points to future interconnected global megatrends, catastrophic biodiversity loss, impending resource scarcity, explosive population growth, rapid urbanization, and a massive global infrastructure investment gap.
All of which are linked.
Exactly. These aren't isolated issues occurring in vacuums. They are deeply intertwined with everything we discussed today. The ground isn't just shifting beneath the concrete foundation. The entire planetary landscape is evolving, and the rules of the game are changing in real time.
It promises to be an incredibly complex era, but it is ultimately a solvable puzzle if we empower ourselves to apply the right operational frameworks.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the historical data is no longer your safety net, and the time for incremental change in your professional life is officially over. We will see you next time as we continue to explore how to build a resilient, net positive future.